Hello and welcome to the Final Straight F1 podcast with Ben and Donda.
And today we're looking at the story of the 2024 Dutch Grand Prix, where Lando Norris finally and surprisingly won his second Grand Prix ever. I say surprisingly, not because nobody expected him to win, but surprisingly because it's only the second win so far in his career, which does that surprise you actually? That Lando Norris has only won 2 Grand Prix.
Yeah,
so
it kind
far.
of does. It kind of does because, we are right now, we're speaking of him as a title contender, right?
Yeah.
And we actually spoke about him as a title contender and he has won his maiden race. He won the maiden race in this season. So, yeah, it feels kind of strange and it feels like he's already done much more than perhaps the statistics say.
Yeah.
But yeah, what would you say? How do you feel about him winning only his second Grand Prix of his actually whole F1 career?
Well, I feel like since this, this jump that McLaren made with their upgrades and Lando's first win at Miami, it has been kind of clear that they have the strongest car, but I feel like due to one reason or another, something has always prevented them, either due to strategy or driver error, from winning. So it really seems like, despite having the strongest car by quite a lot. I mean, Lando won with the biggest margin of the season so far. I think it was 22.8 seconds.
Yeah,
that
it was
was
22.9 seconds or something, exactly as you say.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, despite having the strongest car, it's clear that they still have things to work on if they want to, if they want to win the title, or if they want to win races consistently, which is what they need to do if they want to win the title. Because Lando Norris is not that far behind Max Verstappen in the standings, but also not so close as to say, oh yeah, he has it, And, it's even surprising me that Lando Norris is closer to Charles Leclerc, who's in third right now, than to Max Verstappen, despite Charles Leclerc not scoring points at 3 of the recent Grand Prix, which is not to say, that Lando Norris isn't doing great, but it's hard to catch up to Max Verstappen, who was very consistent in the first 7 races of the season, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it only goes to show that for many people watching, it's not just the car. Yeah. And it's not just the driver as well. It's because we know Lando Norris is an amazing driver. He is an S-tier driver, if you want to call it like that. He is a championship material. However, I think, as you say, the car, it is clearly the fastest right now because Lando won not only the race, but he won the pole position. He was on pole by almost 4 tenths.
By quite a lot,
right?
4 tenths in Zandvoort, which is a pretty short track as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a huge margin, and we're used to Verstappen having this kind of margin. And I think even the Ferrari was very surprised, because you saw the cool down room where Leclerc asked Verstappen how far was he behind Lando Norris. And when Verstappen said, oh, it's something around 22 seconds, Leclerc's face just said it all. It was like, damn, what are we doing wrong, right? Because Ferrari, let's not forget, at the start of the season, they were ahead of McLaren.
They were ahead by quite a lot. They were the clear second best team in Bahrain and Jeddah. And there were already jokes being made about, Verper Lek is the new Hamver bot, or something. And that was in Jeddah, and that of course quickly changed as the season has progressed. But as you said, Ferrari were also surprised by McLaren's pace, but that wasn't the only surprise, I'd say, from Ferrari this weekend, because they had a pretty terrible qualifying. And Carlos Sainz starting P10 after some penalties that the other drivers have received. And Charles Leclerc only dragged it into P6. So they were very pessimistic, about Sunday, as we've seen in the past few races. But surprisingly, the Ferraris on Sunday drove crazy well. They had amazing pace. And of course, the drivers did super well as well. I mean, look at Carlos Sainz, who went from P10 to P5, right? And Charles Leclerc, who managed to go from P6 to P3 by managing to keep Oscar Piastri behind him for like 40 laps.
True.
Despite we've seen how McLaren, how fast their car is, but Leclerc managed to defend for 40 laps. I mean, of course, we also saw that overtaking wasn't the easiest, but with a car as fast as the McLaren, you would have thought that they'd be past the Ferraris in like 2 laps or something, but that didn't happen. What did you think of this Ferrari surprise?
Well, I think that, let's mention it first, we're not used to pleasant surprises by Ferrari. Yeah, exactly. Rather the disappointing ones, so it was rather refreshing being positively surprised. And as you say, like Sainz's charge from P10, P5, he overtook a lot of cars. He had very good pace. And and also Charles Leclerc, like great start. Both Ferrari, a good start. And Leclerc on the podium on a track that was absolutely not supposed to suit them, because the Ferrari, it is very weak in the high-speed corners, right?
Yeah.
That's supposed to be their weakness, and they had no upgrade as well. Like for the recent races, they had no upgrades. They were just figuring out the path, how they're going to move forward. But that begs the question also, how will Monza go? Didn't they kind of, mistakenly do the calculations wrong, just saying, oh, we're going to be very bad at Zandvoort and very good at Monza. How about...
Maybe it's switched, and the Italian home fans will be very, very sad come Sunday.
Hopefully not, but it was...
Because Fred Vasseur did also say that, Zandvoort is not going to be one of our greatest. We're going to do much better at some of the other tracks that are coming, and we're also bring upgrades that are going to help us add these other tracks that are not that suited for our car. But clearly they did some wrong calculations, or there was an error somewhere, because they were very good here, which begs the question, what happened there? Like, what was it, the simulator? Was it the... I just hope that this doesn't translate into them doing way worse somewhere else. But we have to see. We have to wait and see we have to wait for Sunday.
Yeah. I think, to be fair, to be honest, when I'm thinking about it, a lot of the surprises probably are very... I think they were very influenced by the tire wear. Because the tires, like we had the hardest compound tires. And for some reason still, we've had so many cars also having degradation issues. Like the tires went off a lot faster than they were supposed to, perhaps, or, and it seems like it may not be the outright pace of the red cars, but because they were like, 9/10 behind. Leclerc was like, I think 9/10 behind Norris in the Q3 lap, which around Zandvoort, that's a huge margin. And in the race, I think the Ferrari was very good, surprisingly, on the tires, which, to be fair, we have seen as a trend this year, as opposed to last year's car and the year before's car. So I think they're making some steps in the right direction.
They made a big step, I'd say. And as you say, this has been a trend with them doing a little worse in qualifying, but with gaining some race pace, on the other hand, with lower tire degradation, because that was a huge weakness for Ferraris last year and in 2022, especially towards the end of the season, or last year at the start of the season. They would just, even if Leclerc qualified first, he would fall off within a couple of laps, and there was nothing they could do.
Exactly.
Now,
And speaking of qualifying first, the curse is continuing because we have thought about it, Lando Norris had pole position. This is pretty much the shortest turn one on the calendar from the final straight. And, from the grid position to the first turn, it was, what was it? It's like 200 something meters around that mark. It's super short. And yet again, we saw Lando Norris losing in the lead in the first lap, which felt pretty much like a repeat from many of his other pole positions, or many different ones. It's the 7th time I think he started from P1 and lost the lead.
6th or 7th, counting sprint races. But it's, to be fair to Lando Norris, because as much as we like to kind of shit on him for his mistakes and the human errors, and the starts that he's messed up, this time his reaction time was actually pretty similar to Max's, but both of the McLarens had issues with just jumping off the line with the wheel spin, and also apparently this side of the track was, like the rubber from the tires was from the previous races was worse there in a way, which made the grip a little worse, which gave the left side of the track a disadvantage, a slight disadvantage, because we also saw that Oscar Piastri also didn't have a great start, and he was also almost jumped by the people behind him, but he blocked them off. So yes, the streak is continuing, and it was very, very funny, to be honest, to see Max Verstappen get ahead of Lando in such a short run. But it's this time I feel like it was more of a car thing than reaction time.
Very true. And the thinking was, right, like when we saw Verstappen getting ahead of Norris, because he pulled quite a good gap on the first lap and the second lap,
it looked
right?
like he was pulling ahead. I thought, whoa, is Red Bull back? Like, are we gonna see Max win by 15 seconds? But then he just fell back again.
Yeah, it seemed like, because the first few laps we were like, oh god, he's falling back. Or like, are we like, is this how we're gonna finish the race? Or because bear in mind, over the whole race we did not probably even have a single yellow flag.
Yeah,
the only car that went off was Magnussen in turn 1, maybe even on lap 1 or lap 2, and so there was no chance of a safety car or all cars finished.
Yeah, we haven't had a safety car in, I think it's 6 or 7 races now.
Actually, last time was Canada.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a long time though for
F1.
They're
the drivers, they're getting better.
Seems like it. Seems like it, yeah. That's crazy. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. That kind of, it just goes to show that we don't need a safety car for great races, because we've had some amazing races for the past, 6 or 7 Grand Prix. And I think that, a lot of it has come because of the cars being much more equal and track dependent as well. Because this is something that helps Red Bull, right? It's not only Lando Norris that takes away the points of Verstappen. Sometimes it's Leclerc, sometimes it's the 2 Mercedes, because they have won 3 of the last 5 Grand Prix, which is something weird when you say it out loud. And Max Verstappen has not won a race in 5 or 6 races right now, which is crazy statistic.
I think it'll definitely be close at the end, points-wise. Because depending on how you look at it, I think it's, if Lando gains 7 points per race, he's the winner. Or Max is the winner. If he gains 8, then Lando is the winner. So and let's not forget Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
Lando Norris undercut his own teammate Oscar Piastri, and was then asked to give the place back, thus losing 7 championship points. Now imagine a scenario where we're in Abu Dhabi and Lando Norris loses the title by less than 7 points or less. I mean, as Oscar Piastri, what do you do in that situation? Because I mean, of course, there have been other times that have cost him the points, but this is just like the most obvious one from the recent times.
Yeah, that is very true. And if the season ends with, let's say, Verstappen winning over Norris by a margin that would be less than 20 points, I think then there's going to be a lot of debate in terms of what ifs. Because we're going to be asking ourselves the question, could he have won the championship? Should he have won the championship? Of course, it's his first season that he even, has the car to regularly compete for the wins.
Yep.
Which hasn't happened to him before, and we know that, it gets some time to getting used to, but with Verstappen, you need to be on your A game the whole time, because we have, for some reason, the Red Bull. I don't know if you saw the onboards, but the car is just not steering, and we know that Max is driving a completely opposite style. He likes, oversteer. He likes when the car is very pointy, you make little, wheel input and it turns a lot. And right now, it seemed like he could turn the wheel like 360 and it didn't just move. And is it a question of, is Red Bull being very bad in terms of the development? Are they missing Newey's input on this? Or was it the alleged, variable braking that a lot of people are talking about right now, that Red Bull was actually heating in the past, maybe from the beginning of the season, maybe from before the seasons, but apparently they've got the little finger wag from the FIA. So
if that turns out to be true, then the past few seasons are going to be seen in a wholly different context, I feel like. But I mean, it also depends on the extent, because we've had teams introduce technologies or systems or things like that give them a clear advantage, but aren't illegal per se. I mean, the Mercedes with the, what was it called?
DAS. Yeah, dual axis steering. Yep.
Dual axis steering. And I mean, they introduced that and then it was banned, but only from next year, from the season after that, right? So they still they had the full season where they could use it. Meaning if Red Bull actually came up with something like this that they've had for the past few seasons, and nobody has managed to discover that up until now, and it wasn't illegal per se, and only now the FIA will make it illegal, I don't think that it stains their accomplishments from the past few years. Maybe very slightly. Well, honestly, I don't even think so, because that's a question that's up for debate, I think. But what you said about finishing less than 20 points behind Max Verstappen, I think that's, or within 20 points, I think that's very, very realistic.
Yeah, true. And also, you mentioned Piastri, right?
Yeah.
And there's going to be many more of these moments that we can throw in, right? Like Austria or Great Britain, Silverstone per se, and there's more moments like this, and right now I still think there is a good chance, because I think that, it's not only about where Lando finishes, it's also about where Oscar finishes, and he is a strong driver. Like, he didn't have the greatest of the weekends, but I still think, like, with the beast of a car, if they go on and they even just tune in the upgrades even more, then they have a chance to finish 1-2 pretty much the rest of the season on paper.
On paper, definitely. But on paper is usually very different from reality. I mean, look at Red Bull. Sergio Perez had decent qualifying for once. But then, again, tumbled down the order a little bit. But, even back to Red Bull, I think if they lose the Drivers' Championship, which is a possibility, but if they lose the Constructors, which I think is more probable, then their downfall will be studied, From the start of this season to where we are now, and we've been talking about it, right? because all the inner turmoil that has been happening with Christian Horner, Adrian Newey leaving, the power struggle with, Jos Verstappen and everything related to this. I think it'll be very interesting when, in a few years, one of the people with insider knowledge decides to write a book and we'll get the true story. But until then, we have to... Yeah.
Fun to read. But yeah, as you mentioned, Perez. The weekend of Perez wasn't exactly straightforward as well, even when you look at qualifying, right? He had a little incident with Hamilton, actually. What did you make of that? Because for many people, or from the angle they were showing it from, it seemed very arguable in terms of whether or not it should be a penalty. What is your view on this? Like, do you think he deserved it?
To be quite honest, I didn't catch qualifying live, and I only after the fact I read that Hamilton was penalized for impeding Perez. But what actually happened there?
Well, I think it was after sector 1, after the fast corners, then going down to the slower corner and into basically it's not even a hairpin, but sort of. So Hamilton kind of went very, very, very wide on his, out lap or in lap, slow lap, basically. And Perez was in his hot lap. And when he was steering, Hamilton was on the track, but it was probably the widest, it was the widest track right there, like the widest turn. So, yeah, he slowed down, and then Hamilton continued on the racing line because he thought that Perez would be long past, right? But I still, from my point of view, I think that if Perez just continued, he would naturally just go through, because Hamilton couldn't go more to the left or more out of the way. It was just very unfortunate in terms of where he caught him. But yeah, I guess the FIA had a different view. You could argue both sides, I guess.
I mean, these qualifying impeding penalties are always contested, at least a little bit, I'd say. Because you can always argue for saying, I gave enough space, but at the end of the day, it's the FIA.
Yeah, exactly.
The final say.
You don't get to say. We don't get to decide as fans, right? But
yeah.
Another penalty that we didn't talk about was Alex Albon, who actually started pretty much next to his teammate, who didn't even qualify because he crashed, and he had a big crash.
There was fire, as we saw.
Did you see the crazy crash? Yeah,
I saw. And we talked about Williams in our last episode, while we still had our production budget for a live studio. But we talked about Logan. We mentioned Logan Sargent and Williams and Logan Sargent, and there have been talk about Logan Sargent being subbed out for the rest of the season and being replaced by Mick Schumacher at Williams, which I think is quite interesting because Mick Schumacher wasn't as much of a fan as I am. He wasn't exactly the most crash avoidant driver either. So I don't know if, but Sebastian Vettel has apparently come out in support of Mick coming back. But what do you think about this potential move made by James Vowles, the mastermind?
Well, I think after seeing how much the Sargent's the Sargent's crash cost, I think it was about $1.7 million because he destroyed the whole upgrades, everything. So
yeah.
And probably the engine as well, because it was on fire, right? So it was a very badly timed crash. And, in those conditions, it was damp conditions, it could happen, but to any driver. But I feel like, I don't know, he was very wide in terms of going to the grass, which was, I don't know, from our perspective, an avoidable mistake going off the power, on the power. But car like Williams, you try to see every millimeter of the track, and it's difficult. But in terms of the actual, driver transfer or potential driver transfer. I've heard like there are probably 2 options or 3 options. I've heard about Kimi Antonelli possibly driving in Monza for Williams, which he probably won't because, let's be fair, I think he drives in FP1 for Mercedes because he just turned 18. Right?
And there's a possibility of him being announced as the Mercedes driver for next year because, the Italian Grand Prix, where else?
Exactly. His home Grand Prix. And then I've heard about Liam Lawson, your twin brother. I don't know if you have some inside info from your twin brother, but I guess maybe some exclusive for the Final Straight F1 podcast if you want, but...
No exclusive, but in relation to Liam Lawson, I've read that Helmut Marko was on record saying Liam Lawson will be driving one of our cars 2025. Now, what that means for F1, for Red Bull, for VCARB, I think it's anyone's guess. Does this mean that Yuki Tsunoda is leaving? Does this mean he has his contract, I think. Does this mean that Daniel Ricciardo is going to Red Bull? Is Perez being fired? Or does this just mean that Liam Lawson will be driving golf carts around the paddock? That is the question.
That's a great question. And
knowing Helmut Marko, that could be the answer.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, I've heard Horner contradicting that, but I mean, that's pretty usual in terms of between these two. But yeah, I mean, it looks very possible that Mick Schumacher could replace Sargent in the Williams right now. Also,
going back to Daniel Ricciardo and his potential Red Bull move, it's kind of, it's unfortunate for Daniel. We just have made some bad transfer choices in the past.
Yeah.
Going to Renault, then to McLaren, which seemed like he just hasn't been very lucky. And I just want to say that it would be pretty on brand for Daniel Ricciardo to go to Red Bull just as they would fall off and become, stop being a top team. But we'll see.
That would be crazy timing. But that would be a crazy timing because the reason why, right? Because the reason why he went from Red Bull to Renault in the first place was because he said, I have accomplished winning races in Red Bull and I don't feel like they can do much more. And if it's the case again, what the hell is going to happen?
Gonna go to Alpine next. But talking about Alpine, Jack Doohan has been confirmed for the second seat after Esteban Ocon was promptly fired after sowing chaos in the French team all season. We go back to Monaco, where he just assaulted Gasly. But Gasly had a very good weekend as well.
Yeah, amazing. It was his elbows were very much out of the potential window of the car because he just defended like a...
I mean, his moves in the first set of corners was very impressive.
Yeah, he defended.
Were very impressive. Yeah,
he defended very well. He made some moves. I think he came out on top of the, what was it, like the five-way battle into turn one, braked by Magnussen's train.
When Kevin Magnussen was trying to slow down 4 cars to help.
Exactly.
Nico Hülkenberg. This is just... But remember, he did this in Jeddah already. Like, Haas have been doing some crazy strategies this year. And by crazy, I mean borderline insane. Borderline, off the book.
Yeah, the Book of Forbidden Moves
by Magnussen. Forbidden Moves by Kevin Magnussen.
And speaking of Haas, actually, I don't know if you've heard about that, but they apparently almost couldn't leave Zandvoort to Monza because they had to pay the remaining return, or the sponsorship deal money back to what was it, Uralkali from Russia, right? And there was so many problems. They had to pay, and their assets were seized before, and frozen before they could
it was
return.
like millions of euros.
Yeah,
and
it was like
apparently
8 million.
They sent them on Friday.
Yeah.
But they didn't arrive until Monday, and they couldn't leave Zandvoort
That's
until
bizarre.
the receipt until they'd have the receipt. Meaning they everybody had left Zandvoort, and then you could see pictures of just the Haas trucks there waiting for.
It was amazing.
I mean,
can you imagine the scenes? Like, what would happen if Haas just couldn't compete because their cars were literally stuck
in
Zandvoort?
They would have to go again.
That would be insane. Jeez. Luckily, that didn't happen. And all 10 teams will hopefully be competing in Monza. And we don't know if all the drivers will, but we will see. Because, I don't know, let's get back to the debate of Williams. Who would you put in as James Vowles, the team principal driven by data?
The team principal driven by data, that is. Very good question. Well, so we're choosing between Kimi Antonelli, Mick Schumacher, and
Liam Lawson.
Liam Lawson.
Yeah, and Sargent, of course, your driver.
And Sargent. Well, of course, if you want to be nice to your driver, and you have at least some faith left in him, then you keep Logan Sargent, I'd say. But of course, if you want to maximize results, then, well, I feel like the safest option might be Liam Lawson currently, given that he's the one that was that drove in F1 the most recently, at the end of the last season.
True.
Because then you have Mick Schumacher, who's been gone for almost 2 years, right? And Kimi Antonelli, who's a rising star, but not that proven yet. Well, of course, there are not that many races to go, but we're still not that close to the end of the season.
Exactly.
I will be biased, or just I will be nice, and I will say Mick Schumacher is. Liam Lawson is probably going to end up on the grid sooner or later, hopefully. According to Helmut Marko next year, Kimi Antonelli is all but confirmed for Mercedes.
Yeah.
Meaning that the odd one out is Mick Schumacher, who Toto Wolff has been hyping up for the last 2 years.
But that could be seen as an advantage, to be honest. Because think about it this way, right? You have Lawson, who is signed with Red Bull. Yeah. Right? Couldn't he give back insights to Red Bull about not only the Williams team? Sure, they don't have the best chassis, anything, but they have the Mercedes engine, which is something that no Red Bull driver as of current, except for Perez, has really driven, right? And, okay, maybe Ricciardo in terms of the RB, but never mind. We have the only driver who would probably cause the littlest harm could be Mick Schumacher, because he's experienced. He has a few seasons, full-time seasons, actually, in F1.
Full-time seasons.
Yep, and Kimi Antonelli, he is a young gun, right?
Yeah.
You could still expect some crashes, maybe, who knows? But with Mick, depends. Yeah, it's an interesting for me.
I think if, as James Vowles, you're trying to cut costs and you're trying to avoid crashes as much as you can. Maybe Liam Lawson might be, because we haven't
sure.
He's only been there. He was only there for a few races, but he didn't get into a lot of trouble. Pretty consistent. But I think Mick Schumacher. It might be fun to. It would be fun to see him back on the grid. Especially seeing how he would stack up against the rest of the grid, or against Alex Albon.
And that's a good point. That's a good point, because anyone who's going to be next to Albon in that car, they're going to be tested fairly well, and there's going to be a huge spotlight on anyone who's next to him, right? Because he's a good driver, and
Mick Schumacher, his first season, it was with one of the worst cars that we see on the grid, right, in the past 2 years.
Fair.
Relative to the others. Him and Nikita Mazepin were almost always 19th and 20th.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the next season, he was not very consistent. But sometimes he got P6 once, I think, or...
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, or
I don't know if it was Austria or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, but it was doing better. I mean, K-Mag was outperforming him, but it was kind of this push and pull. But yeah, just it would be interesting to see him back on the grid.
Yeah, I agree.
I would say.
It would be very interesting, and whoever comes, gonna be better.
But regardless of who's racing in Monza, I think we should give our predictions on the Italian Grand Prix. Because we didn't give our predictions for the Dutch one, because we predicted the whole rest of the season. We'll see how that goes.
Very
but
true.
What do you think for Monza? What are your hot, bold takes?
I think that Verstappen is not gonna finish on the podium. I think that, we have seen Red Bull being very strong with their lower down for spec or low drag spec.
Yep.
And, typically Monza is not their domination track. And I believe that McLaren is going to be extremely strong. I think Ferrari is going to be very good in terms of qualifying. In terms of race pace, they have fixed their tire wear, so I don't expect them to do the same as last year in terms of falling off really quickly. And I think Ferrari and McLaren have very competitive drivers, so probably maybe in the mix with Mercedes, that's a big question mark. Depends on their setup, because the car seems to be a diva at this point. But yeah, we've seen Red Bull reverting to the spec of Bahrain as well, in some cases.
Which is
so
crazy.
They're lost in some case, which is crazy from a car that was dominating the first few races of this season and the past 2 seasons. And what would be your prediction?
My very, very, very bold prediction for 2024 Italian Grand Prix is that we will see a driver dressed in red at the top step of the podium. Meaning a Ferrari driver will win. Actually, not dressed in red, because I think they have the black and yellow suits again.
It's just what I wanted to say.
Yes, not dressed in red, dressed in black and yellow. And I don't know how they're going to achieve that with, the rocket ship that is the McLaren right now. Maybe, I don't know, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri take each other out in the first chicane.
Hopefully
maybe
not.
Maybe Carlos Sainz takes out both his, old best friend from McLaren and his mortal enemy that is Oscar Piastri, or at least it seems like that at times, and they will deliver a Ferrari 1-2 or something completely different. But that is what I.
All right, that sounds pretty good, and we'll see from the points. But right now, I want you to give me your driver of the weekend for the Dutch Grand Prix.
I will have to say Charles Leclerc. Just his last stint, even just for that, just for the pace that he managed to keep that car at, the way he managed to keep Piastri behind. Of course, there were other strong performances, but in my eyes, that was the one.
That's interesting. For me, it would have to be... I would have to agree. Leclerc did an amazing job. And for me, he's the driver of the weekend as well. But just thinking about it, I think very close second, or maybe on par first, was Carlos Sainz. The only thing that let him down was qualifying. But I think overall, when you look throughout the race, he had the stronger race pace. But probably it's due also because Leclerc was stuck behind Piastri for the first 20-30 laps, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, who would be your bottom field driver of the day? And I feel like we could get along on this as well.
Yeah. The Frenchman going crazy, Pierre Gasly.
Yeah.
I think he showed showed what he can do, and he has to be my pick. I think you agree.
Very, very much in line with your. He did an
Nice.
amazing and stellar job in that. In something that finished 20 seconds behind the rest of the field in Bahrain, it's crazy to say that they are starting to get into the points now, and right now they're ahead of Williams and Sauber.
Yeah.
Jeez, yeah, they're making a comeback.
Sauber is
Flavio doing his job.
Sauber was lapped. They were lapped like 4 times. But
yet Bottas finished second. Because what the hell happened in the end, right? Like
the graphic, the TV direction was strange the whole race. I'd say not showing
very off.
The overtakes. But how would you rate the race out of 10?
To be honest, I would probably rate it a 5 out of 10 because I think we expect Dutch Grand Prix to be very hard to overtake on. Maybe we expected some weather changes in the race, which did not happen.
Yeah.
But to be honest, it delivered mostly because Lando was stuck behind Verstappen and he had to overtake him, and a few drivers coming through the field. But how would you rate this weekend?
Yeah, maybe a 6, 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Down there.
5.5 for you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's awesome because we're back with Formula One after the summer break, and we're back with a doubleheader, right? Because it's Monza within a few days. So we have a lot to be looking forward to.
Yeah. And of course, we will be here to talk about it right after the Grand Prix again. Thank you for tuning in, and see you at the next episode of Final Straight Podcast, F1 Podcast.
Yep. And thank you very much for watching. If you have any suggestions, just leave it in the comments. We'll be happy for anything. But it's been great, and we're going to see you soon. Thank you very much, and take care. Goodbye.
Bye.